Hello there, I'm Alfred Weber, and today is Saturday, July 16th, 2011, and once again we're with independent scientist Leuren Moret, who's coming to us from Berkeley, California. Welcome.
Thank you, Alfred.
Leuren. Well, you know, today's update that we can summarize as follows. Nuclear genocide of babies and children in Japan, the United States, and Canada grows and is documented is a very sobering one. And that is what the data has now come back since our last program. And I guess that this is going to be a very sobering episode of our update. And I just wondered, you call it the third nuclear war for Japan and the U.S.
That's correct. The three nuclear wars that have been carried out in Japan already are the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombing in World War II, 1945. We're coming very close to the anniversary, August 6th, when Hiroshima was bombed, August 6th in Japan, and August 9th in Japan when Nagasaki was bombed. And those were bombs that were produced under the Manhattan Project, and none of the scientists and all of the military were completely opposed. I mean, all of the scientists and all of the military were completely opposed to dropping them on a human population. So that was the beginning of the nuclear wars and the depopulation agenda, which is being carried out by the Anglo-Dutch monarchies and the international financiers, the Rothschilds and whoever they represent in the city of London, and the Rockefellers in Wall Street. So the coolest thing about radiation, it can be whatever you want it to be. It's a spin doctor's dream. But everything about radiation can be manipulated. So yes, it's a spinner's dream. And I never really thought about the extent to which it was true until now. John Goffman encountered this spin, and certainly the scientists I work with have, including the Russians studying Chernobyl, the scientists I've worked with in the U.S. to collect 6,000 baby teeth from children living around nuclear power plants, and now the depleted uranium. So Fukushima is just more radiation added on top of this. And John Goffman encountered this spin when he was working with radioactive isotopes. He was an associate director at the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab, and he was hired from UC Berkeley to specifically study the effects of ionizing radiation on biological systems. And when he began accurately reporting his findings at international scientific meetings, all of his funding was cut, and the house next door to him was burned to the ground in San Francisco, he told me as a warning. So some government officials said basically, you know, to Goffman and others, so what? They'll get cancer years from now. But we need nuclear energy now. Time delay helps. If people are not lying on the ground trying not to vomit while they're bleeding out of their noses and their mouths, the nuclear apologists can say, hey, he's fine. We never laid a hand on him. So this hidden agenda of depopulation and weakening countries that pose a threat is being repeated by impacting the vibrant developing economies in Asia with long lingering illnesses from radiation poisoning and mutilation of the genetic future of vast populations. And that now includes North America, Canada, the US, Mexico, and all this radiation from Fukushima is ending out, washing up on the shores of Hawaii, Guam, and other Pacific islands. And within about 2 weeks, it was already into the southern hemisphere. So this is a global nuclear holocaust, and it will also have a tremendous effect on the sea mammals, such as whales and walruses, sea lions, orcas. It's going to really have a terrible impact on the oceans, too.
Dolphins.
Dolphins, that's right. And of course, orcas are large dolphins. They're not really whales. So, so I'm going to start with an article that was published and written by Dr. Jeanette Sherman, who I have worked with for 10 years on the baby teeth study. And she published this on June the 9th, 2011 in Counterpunch. And what she found was a dramatic 35% spike in infant mortality on the west coast of the U.S. since March 11th, when the Fukushima earthquake happened. And she and Dr. Joe Mangano went to the Centers for Disease Control data, which every county in the United States has to report their vital statistics: births and deaths, disease rates, causes of death, so forth and so on. And what they did was they took that data for infant mortality and for the cities of Boise, Idaho, Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon, plus California cities, Santa Cruz, Sacramento, San Francisco, San Jose, and Berkeley. And they looked at the changes in infant mortality for about 5 or 6 weeks before the Fukushima disaster and the 4 months afterwards. And they did find a 35% increase in infant mortality in just 4 months. That is astounding. That is statistically significant, and there better be a reason and answer about why this happened. Now, immediately, they were attacked from the nuclear establishment globally, and even scientists in Japan said that they were not factual and they were exaggerating, and they saw no change in Japan, and so forth and so on. And on June the 21st, the Scientific American attacked them and looked at the numbers they used and said they had misrepresented the data and the information and come to the wrong conclusion. Well, that was really interesting because there were comments after the Scientific American article, and some of the readers actually, well, the Scientific American recalculated and said they had made a mistake, but other readers actually cherry-picked. The Scientific American accused Dr. Sherman of cherry-picking the cities. So the critics cherry-picked 4 cities, Portland, Tacoma, Seattle, and Spokane, and calculated the infant mortality since March 11th. And it had increased actually 42% just in those 4 cities since March 11th. So it actually backfired on the critics and strongly supported the findings of Dr. Sherman and Dr. Mangano. So it must be higher in the Northwest. This is in British Columbia and Washington State, because there's higher rainfall there. And the radiation contamination on the ground depends on two factors: weather and geography. So this is this higher rate in the northwestern North America would also be consistent with the geography and the weather.
Well, here in British Columbia, Canada, not only the government, but people who are caught up inside the government meme, such as people who are associated with government-infiltrated radio stations like Vancouver Co-op Radio, are sending out emails and news that this 35% spike in infant mortality is actually the parents' fault. Do you have any comment on that?
I sure do. This is all coming from the Health Physics Society in the United States. It's called the spin that I described at the beginning of our interview. And when there was extensive bombing of Yugoslavia with depleted uranium weapons, for the first 3 days there was no ground action. And there was a huge NATO attack on Yugoslavia in 1998. For the first three days, they were never on the ground. It was a carpet bombing campaign by the NATO forces, and the UN had asked countries surrounding Yugoslavia, including the Yugoslavia Radiation Monitoring Laboratory, to monitor for uranium in the air. And all these countries, Greece, Italy, Yugoslavia, Hungary, all reported large increases in uranium in the air filters and the ground filters they were using, and also a very large increase in nanoparticles in the atmosphere. That's the depleted uranium. And these very tiny particles that form a radioactive gas are caused by the high temperatures that are reached when uranium burns. And certainly that's happened at Fukushima too. They've had a lot of accidents, and there have been 3 explosions, and a number of actual nuclear events, which Dr. Busby has confirmed were criticality. So we've had nothing but releases into the ocean and the atmosphere since March 11th, and it's not over. It's continuing every day. So what has happened is that after the attacks on Dr. Sherman and Joseph Mangano, they wrote another article which was published on June 25th, and they went back for 10 years for Centers for Disease Control data, and they found that the increase in infant mortality since March 11th is even higher compared to the last 10 years than what they calculated as 35%. And this is going to grow. The babies are the very first to die. And then on July 5th, just a week and a half later, the Canadian Public Health, or their radiation group, reported a mortality spike in British Columbia that confirms what Dr. Sherman found. And of course, the Canadians said, "Oh, it's sudden infant crib syndrome. It's the parents are sleeping with the baby, so on and so forth." And the British medical journal, what's it called?
Lancet.
Lancet reported that there were clusters of mysterious infant mortality in 20 regions of Europe. And this is after the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia with uranium. And they said the same things. It's because the parents are smoking. It's because the babies are sleeping with the parents. It's because of this and that, but always blaming the parents. And what a tragedy to conceal their complicity in a global genocide by blaming it on the parents. But that's the spin that the nuclear industry consistently follows. And it's always attacking the victims. But of course, the rule about victimization is that the perpetrator always turns himself into the victim. So now we do not have data for infant mortality increases in Japan, and that will probably be very difficult to get because the United States government is actually running the response in Japan through the Department of Energy, and they will not want that information to get out. And that's why Dr. Sherman was so viciously attacked. They don't want the U.S. government and the Department of Energy and British Petroleum and the monarchs of Britain and Holland and the international financiers do not want people to understand that they are being targeted with a global genocidal war.
So let me get this right, and I really want to express it. If we go to the top of this pyramid of targeting, at the top of the pyramid, by your research, is the British crown, the orange crown, that is the crown of the Netherlands, Royal Shell Dutch, and all of that, and certain other Zionist financial bloodlines. Is that it?
Yes, that's correct.
Right,
and
the Rockefellers. And there are people like
yes.
David Rockefeller and
Yes.
that constellation.
Yes.
And those have adopted, and we can go back
Yes.
over 100 years,
Yes.
they've adopted eugenic depopulation programs.
Yes.
And so now they're putting them into effect
Yes.
to exterminate. I've heard that they want to bring the population down to 500 million from the almost 7 billion that they are now.
Well, what Prince Philip and other actors in this global agenda to depopulate the world, they've said that they want to bring it down to 1 billion in the next 2 generations. That's where are we going to bury 5 billion people?
Yeah, so they probably are looking at it in the same way that they look at their racehorses and their cattle, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
One can imagine then the plans that they have for their hereditary offspring, such as Prince William.
Correct.
Yeah, I know that's a little off, but I just want to make the point of associating these royal crowns and the Rockefeller, the British crown, the Netherlands crown, the Zionist Rothschild, City of London, evidentially, forensically speaking, with this genocide.
Well, Prince William and his new wife, Kate, they've actually been living together for 16 years. They were put together in a house at their university when they were 16 or 17 years old. And they've been together ever since. And they were not allowed to marry until the end of April in just a few months ago in 2011. And that coincided with the 25th anniversary of Chernobyl. This is worse than Chernobyl. This is much worse than Chernobyl. And this happened just a month and a half before they were married. So if they had 16 years to choose a wedding date, I think that the coinciding of their wedding date with Fukushima disaster and the anniversary of Chernobyl cannot be a mistake or an accident or anything but deliberate.
Plus, also, during the actual royal wedding of the heir to this British, genocidal British crown, there were HAARP-caused tornadoes throughout the South, from the southeast to the southwest of the U.S., as you pointed out, with rain, with radioactivity from Fukushima being brought across the Pacific by weather warfare of HAARP and raining down. So that was the wedding gift of the House of Windsor to the people of the United States. Am I exaggerating, or is this like true?
Well, I think that the wedding of Kate and Prince William symbolizes that in the time when they will be on the throne, the effects of the Fukushima disaster will be very, very, very obvious, and that's about 2 generations probably. So in 2 generations, they will be ruling over a very, very different global population. It will be much smaller. Not to mention the permanent genetic damage to all future generations. It's horrific. It's so unbelievable. It's so Orwellian. It's so horrific that it's amazing for me to even do the research on it. It's so shocking.
Right. I didn't want to get you off track, but at the same time, for our viewers, I wanted to really cement that fact of who's at the top of the pyramid leading forward this genocide, initially of babies and children, and then of all humankind.
And I'd just like to mention that this is nothing new. Malthus, in the 1700s, he was a British intellectual. He proposed that the world population was a tremendous threat in the future. Well, there was no overpopulation then, so where did he get that idea? There was nothing that justified it. And that was picked up and expanded by Darwin and Aldous Huxley, who were the originators of the modern eugenics movement and theory or hypothesis or whatever you want to call it. And it was the Rockefellers in the 1920s who brought eugenics from the Rhodes Round Table in England to the United States. So this has been an ongoing situation. The British practiced eugenics in Canada before the Americans ever did, and they gave smallpox contaminated blankets to the First Nation people in Canada in the Acadia area. So all this eugenics and depopulation and genocide is really originating in Britain. And the Dutch were not innocent either. They had colonies, they practiced that too. And the Dutch East India Company, the East India Company, the Hudson Bay Company, they are all part of this British global depopulation for land grabs and mineral resources, as well as spices. That was what the East Indias were so attractive for. But let's go back to Japan,
right,
and look at evidence that indicates the infant mortality is going to increase in Japan also. There's a video clip on YouTube, and it's an albino baby bunny rabbit that was born on May 7th without ears, and it's an albino, and it was right outside of the 18-mile exclusion zone that was evacuated. Now, since May 21st, there have been 2,323,705 views of that video. And what is happening is that other animal mutations have also been reported now, increased in Fukushima Prefecture. And the woman who owns the farm where this rabbit was born said in 10 years of raising animals here, we have never had a mutation, and certainly never a mutation like this in any of our rabbits. And she said, we do not use local or consume local feed or food now. We bring it all in from outside of the Fukushima area. So we're going to see a big increase in infant mortality. There's no doubt about that at all. But it will be hard to get the documentation from Japan. So, any questions?
Well, I'm just you know, now that we're on Japan, I think that as you can begin to expose the Japanese government complicity in the ongoing genocide of Japanese babies and children, that will be somewhat mirrored by what appears to be the Canadian and the U.S. government complicity in the genocide of U.S. babies and children and Canadian babies and children. So maybe we should go on, get into the Japanese government complicity in this baby and child genocide, which is sort of the first wave of the genocide we can expect.
Well, the foreign minister of the interior, let's see what his name is. Hold on. His name is Nishio Masamachi. He is a radiation treatment specialist at the Hokkaido Cancer Center, but he was also a member of the Japanese government under Prime Minister Hatari, I think. Anyway, the Hatama, the last one. And he said he blames much of this disaster on, quote, nuclear industry lobbyists and academic flunkies. He calls them Goyo Gakusha of the government who built up the myth of nuclear safety in the first place. And that certainly is true because it's true in the United States, France, everywhere in all countries with nuclear power plants. It's always been the academics who sold this to the government, to the public, and they're really responsible for this. Now, the Prime Minister, Nato Kan, his attitude and his message to the Japanese people is eat it and be patriotic about the food in the Fukushima prefecture and other parts of Japan that is very contaminated with this Fukushima radiation. And he was speaking at a news conference to mark 1 month, so that would have been in the middle of April, since the massive earthquake and tsunami devastated the northeastern coast of the country. And Japanese Prime Minister Kan said produce from the region around the Fukushima plant is safe to eat despite radiation leaks. There's the spin again. And this is translated from his speech. Quote, from now on, people should not fall into an extreme self-restraint mood, and they should live life as normal. To consume products from the areas that have been affected is also a way in which to support the area. We should enjoy the use of such products and support the areas that have been affected. I ask you to do this. And with the Japanese culture, they obey authority blindly. They obey academics. They obey government officials. And even they cannot protect themselves from things that are very obviously life-threatening, including the effects of this Fukushima disaster. Now, Prime Minister Kan has a powerful ally in Professor Shinichi Yamashita. He is a UN representative or agent. He worked at the WHO, the World Health Organization, in Europe, and he is a professor at Nagasaki University, which seems to be part of these academic whores who are going on television constantly from the University of Nagasaki and the University of Tokyo to assure the public that everything is safe and they can go on with their lives normally, and the radiation is actually good for you, and all kinds of baloney like that. So Professor Yamashita was recently appointed advisor on the radiation issue to the Fukushima province or prefecture. There was such an outcry against him that the government considered in Fukushima government considered withdrawing his appointment. But then he was appointed by the national government to be vice president of Fukushima University to oversee a $1.26 billion Japanese government study of Fukushima residents over the next 30 years. So the government is unwilling to evacuate 350,000 children in that radiation zone that's higher than Chernobyl, and they are willing to fund a $1.25 billion project to study these radiation guinea pigs over the next 30 years. Professor Yamashita, on his first visit to Fukushima, where he went around and talked to communities everywhere, said, these are some of his quotes, quote, "The effects of radiation do not come to people that are happy and laughing. They come to people that are weak-spirited, that brood and fret." He also went to the mothers, pregnant mothers even, and told them that exposure to 100 millisieverts will not have any health effect on them or the baby. Remember the number 100. Compared to that, the Soviet Union required a mandatory evacuation during Chernobyl at 5 millisieverts. This is 20 times higher.
How can Japan, which suffered Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which, quote, supposedly, has rational people, how can they put in a mind control agent like this fellow who says, stay in 100 millisieverts with your
unborn baby,
unborn babies, when the Russians, the Soviets, evacuated people at 5 millisieverts. Bring us inside what is going on here. Is this like Japan is ruled by Rockefeller and the British Crown? Is that basically what's going on?
Well, basically, yes, because when World War II ended, MacArthur and the U.S. military took over, along with Colonel Lonsdale, who was a CIA agent, or OSS. And what they did was the Japanese railroad unions and the student movements and the Japanese population were so excited that they thought they were getting a democracy, that America was bringing a democracy to them, and they would finally be out from under the tyrannical rule of the Japanese imperial family, which has ruled Japan for 1,000 years continuously. And what happened instead is that the money that was looted from 12 Southeast Asian countries and China, and that's 5,000 years of accumulated wealth from international trade within that region. That's a huge amount of money. And it was so much gold, the London bankers didn't even know that much gold existed in the world. That was divided into 2 funds. And this is all described in the book Yamashita's Gold, or the Gold Warriors. Yamashita's gold and how the U.S. got a hold of it. The U.S. got a lot of that loot, divided it into two funds. One fund was for setting up post-World War II Japan. And that money was used to set up the war criminals from World War II. The Japanese war criminals set up the political parties, the parliament, and the whole political apparatus infrastructure for Japan. So it's really the partners of the British and Dutch crown monarchies that are running Japan now, and the whole country is taken over and just run by the Rockefellers. Sony, which we think is a Japanese corporation, actually stands for Standard Oil of New York, which is the Rockefellers. And the Rockefellers bought Hiroshima and Nagasaki when the cities were radioactive nuclear disasters, and bought them for almost nothing and rebuilt them. Now, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are still radioactive because I worked at the Leuren Moret lab and walked into a lab in the environmental department one day, and there were rock cores from, I didn't know where they were from. I just said, where are those from? What are you doing with those? And the scientists nonchalantly said, oh, we go to Hiroshima and Nagasaki every 3 months and send a team there, or perhaps 6 months, to collect specimens, because Hiroshima is still radioactive and Nagasaki is too, and so are the people. We're studying them too. This was in 1991. They've been studying them every year, sampling humans and the environment since 1945. So of course...
this is actually a genocide that has been being studied since 1945.
Yes.
Organizations like the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory are monitoring this, such that when the false flag operation of Fukushima occurs, which we know the CIA had a hand in because of the Stuxnet virus, we know that the International War Crimes Racketeering Organization, namely the British Crown, has a hand in because of the HAARP. So we're dealing with a genocide that has been carefully monitored since 1945, with a trigger pulled on March 11, 2011, with the buildup toward the marrying of Prince William and his consort, the future king, and we know that he qualifies under the protocols as the, quote, king of the New World Order, or the future king of the Zionists. So is that kind of the picture?
That's exactly the picture.
Yeah.
And just to make sure that people believe or understand how the Dutch are participating, they did many horrible things in their colonies. So they're just as capable as the British of doing horrific things. And I was talking to the Manhattan Project scientist who's mentored and taught me all of this, and I was talking about the airport scanners, these backscatter X-ray machines to X-ray the passengers, and they're causing horrific health problems. And he said, who's building those? Where are those coming from? I said, well, I think it's Michael Chertoff, and he's the head of Homeland Security, apparently. He has a company manufacturing them. And Marion folks said, no. It's an old company that's been doing this for a long time. So I looked on the internet while we were on the phone. He's 90. And up popped Philips Electronics in Arnhem, Holland. That's who is manufacturing the X-ray scanners at the airports, and this is also part of the depopulation. Now,
and that's a company of the Dutch Crown.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
And,
so
and
this is where the depopulation is coming in, that ties into 9/11, And these are plans that have been going on since World War II.
And British Petroleum, the disaster in the Gulf and Hurricane Katrina, and the Haiti earthquake and the Sumatra earthquake and Fukushima is just another wrecking the environment demonstration. These are all demonstrations to them. Now, why did I include Professor Shinichi Yamashita in this report? It's because he epitomizes the government and government scholars who told them all along that radiation from Fukushima 1 nuke plant was at a totally safe level. And there was nothing to worry about. It was all in your head. Foreign news media are lying. Eat, drink, play, live as normal. It turned out to be anything but normal for Fukushima, for Japan, for North America, for the islands in the Central Pacific, and now for the entire Northern and Southern Hemisphere. It's not just nothing. Now, immediately after the accident, Yamashita was sent by the national government to major cities and towns in Fukushima to address the concerns of the citizens. He addressed them by saying radiation was nothing to worry about. It was all in their heads. Fukushima would be world famous, so they shouldn't miss this great opportunity. And the residents should stay put. Don't move, in other words. Well, the Fukushima prefecture had been offering free vacations in the summertime to families with children to get out of the contaminated area. But last week they withdrew that offer and canceled the upcoming vacations of many Fukushima families who had already made reservations and planned the trip out of the disaster zone for their children, which the summer vacation begins in about 2 weeks in Japan. The whole month of August they take off. So all of a sudden, the rug is jerked out from under them, and maybe that was just a teaser or a placebo temporarily until it came time to really send them out of the prefecture, and then the rules changed. Now, the third character that I wanted to cover is Wataru Mizuguchi. He is a former president of the Japan Nuclear Energy Safety Organization, which is JNES, the Information System on Occupational Exposure, ISOE, which has an Asian branch, but it's global. It's pretty much headquartered in the United States and very tied to the University of Illinois at Champaign. They have a nuclear engineering, nuclear and plasma engineering department there. And they are very, very wrapped up with the Health Physics Society and the IAEA, and they're also involved with TEPCO now. It's a global network of really, basically, it's the spin doctors. Mr. Mizuguchi, also co-authored a paper that was presented at the 2008 Beijing World Conference on Earthquake Engineering. And his paper was titled, there were many authors on it, Generation of Artificial Earthquake Motion Using Observed Earthquake Motions. Now, the big lie in Japan about nuclear power plants is that they built them to withstand 7.0 earthquakes. But every 5 years, Japan has a magnitude 8 earthquake or greater. So this is part of the setup or part of the booby trap of nuclear power in Japan. And they always talked about the danger of the tsunamis. They never talked about the danger of earthquakes even though all seismologists and most people should, in the nuclear industry, should know in Japan that there's a major earthquake of 8 or greater every 5 years. So by diverting the focus to the danger of the tsunamis, they have covered up the danger or ignored the danger of earthquakes, major earthquakes in Japan. And that's part of the whole deception. So Mizuguchi is actually a really major big player in this disaster because he's the liaison for the Asian group and between the U.S., the nuclear establishment, the IAEO, TEPCO, and the rest of the global nuclear network. And a month ago, he went to Vienna and he met with, it was an IAEA conference about Fukushima, and he actually met with TEPCO, the IAEA, and other health physics officials and so forth. And they are trying to get samples out of Japan, out of the Fukushima area, to do their own study. But it's not, they're having difficulty doing that. So he is also and then, so he's running around doing all this politicking and everything, but he's part of that great word, what is it? The academic flunkies, Goyo Gakusha, I love that word. That's just great. It really does describe them. So now, some of the former ministers and academics actually are very honest. And one of them is former Minister for Internal Affairs, Haraguchi Kazuhiro. He alleged that radiation monitoring station data was actually 3 decimal places greater, 3 times greater than the numbers released to the public. So the radiation contamination the government was reporting was actually 1/3 of what they had measured and documented. Isn't that disgusting? Now, it gets worse. TEPCO, the Tokyo Electric Power Company, which runs, it's actually the largest electric company in Asia. And it runs the nuclear power industry in Japan as well as conventional power plants. But it's not the only electric company in Japan. It's sort of divided up into different regions. But they have exposed their employees to very, very high levels of radiation. There are now 80 of these emergency employees who have disappeared and are probably dead from radiation sickness and overexposure. They locked up the employees who agreed to stay in a gymnasium and made them sleep on the floors. They had no food, hot food, for the first 2 months. They were fed cold, packaged food, kind of like what Halliburton was sending to Iraq to our troops. And they didn't even have any fresh vegetables or fruit. They were locked up, another former minister said, probably so they couldn't run away. And there are many abandoned hotels or empty hotels and resorts not very far from the Fukushima power plant where they could have been housed comfortably with restaurants, showers, the hot springs to relax in. And they were locked up in a gymnasium at the nuclear power plant and not allowed to leave the facility. Now what's happened is it's come out that TEPCO started feeding them fresh food, but it's all from the Fukushima area, which is highly contaminated with radiation. So they're just accelerating the death of their own workers. It's just incredible. And now the president of TEPCO is so cheap and stingy and cost saver, a penny pincher. That's why he's the head of TEPCO. Now he's charging these employees for the food they're consuming. Can you believe that? It just gets worse and worse. And what has happened now is that the nuclear gypsies have appeared, and these are experienced workers who were they were nuclear engineers, they were laborers and so forth, who have been lured back to the nuclear power plant industry as third or fourth level contract workers. And a lot of them are mid to old age. The experienced engineers especially are needed to work at Fukushima, and they're being paid well, but they're also being exposed to very high levels of radiation. Part of the reason they're doing it is out of loyalty to the country, but part of it is that they can't get jobs anywhere, and they are receiving very high salaries for just an hour or two of work a day. Now, the Japanese government announced on July 3rd that they had secretly drawn up a plan to break up TEPCO, and the government is planning to take over the nuclear power industry and the liability of this disaster to force the public to pay for it, while TEPCO will continue to manage and oversee the alternative energy technology companies that will be more profitable in the future. Now, it's interesting that President Sarkozy of France, with Areva by his side, the largest nuclear power company in France, was the first foreign leader to arrive in Japan after the Fukushima disaster, and it's now very clear they were there to get contracts for Areva to do cleanup and water filtering and so forth at Fukushima. But so far, they've done nothing but cause more leaks. Their equipment didn't work. It malfunctioned. It was poorly designed. And parts broke that shouldn't have. And of course, this is exactly what Areva has done in France. So obviously, to me, Areva and its incompetence is just another way to further expose the public, the environment, and to allow the radiation to leak all over the place. It's just exactly what they are doing in Europe and France. Now, the government, like the U.S. government and the Canadian government, in order to deal with this elevated exposure that is illegal under the ICRP, the government in Japan raised the limits. And on April 19th, by April 19th, they had already raised the legal limit for exposure of children from 1/10 of a microsievert per hour to 1 microsievert per hour, which was a 10 times increase just with the snap of a political finger. And on April 19th, just about 3 weeks later, they raised it to 20 millisieverts for children, which is the limit for nuclear workers. How can you expose children and babies that are many times more sensitive to radiation, maybe by 20 times, than adults? It's a death sentence. This is a genocide. You can't call it anything else. Now, this Professor Nishio Masamichi, who is the head of he's at the Hokkaido Cancer Center, is a radiation treatment specialist. He's the one who blamed this on Goyo Gakusha, the academic whores. And he commented on the Japan TEPCO executives, the prime minister and cabinet, the politicians, the nuclear industry lobbyists, and the academic flunkies, the Goyogakusha, in terms of their government leadership. And this is his quote. I want you to listen to this very carefully. He said, "I just cannot feel any hope for Japan's future. These circumstances are simply tragic," unquote.
Right. And so this is what he's feeling probably is the brunt of the false flag operation, which part of the technology is to make people feel hopeless because all of the, quote, helping organizations have been completely infiltrated.